A House Homeland Security subcommittee held a hearing to find out. Witnesses include security officials and the parent of a student killed in the Parkland, Florida high school shooting. Lauren Hogg, Parkland shooting survivor and co-founder of March for Our Lives, also testified and offered her ideas during this 2-hour hearing.
The subcommittee is meeting today to receive testimony on engaging the community's perspectives on school security. Good morning, and thank you everyone who is here today. The subcommittee is meeting to discuss community perspectives on school safety and how the federal government can better support local stakeholders in making our children safer. I want to thank the witnesses for participating in today's hearing. First, we have Ms. Lauren Hogg and Mr. Max Shafter. Testimonies are ones the American public needs to hear and ones that members of Congress should take to heart as we go about our work. A special thank you to both for sharing your experience with us. The chair would also like to acknowledge Congressman Deutsch, who does not sit on this committee, but who represents Parkland, Florida, has been a champion for measures to improve school safety. Now I ask unanimous consent to allow Congressman Deutsch to sit and question the witnesses at today's hearing. Without objection, it is so ordered. I'm glad that this hearing can build upon the school safety field hearing this subcommittee held last year in New Jersey. The 2019-2020 school year is well underway, and our kids are at risk from violence every day. As a parent of triplets, all too often I watch the news, and I am terrified by what I see and hear. Tragically, school violence has taken the lives of too many American children and educators. Now, 20 years since Columbine High School massacre, which left 13 victims dead, our children are still incredibly vulnerable while attending school. Since Columbine, and even before, our nation has been rocked by a tragic cycle of school shootings. The 2012 Sandy Hook shooting left a staggering 20 children and 6 adults dead, yet Congress fell short of passing legislation to combat gun violence in schools. In 2018, there were 24 shootings in K through 12 schools around the country, including the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, that left 14 children and 3 teachers dead, and shooting at Santa Fe High School in Santa Fe, Texas, that claimed 10 victims. The threat to our students continues. During the first half of 2019, there were 22 school shootings. Just last week, a teenager was arrested in Washington State for planning to attack a school on the 21st anniversary of Columbine. Still, the response from the Trump administration and the Republican-controlled Senate has been wholly inadequate. After Parkland, Congress passed the Stop School Violence Act to provide funds for schools looking to improve their safety infrastructure. However, it is important to remember that school infrastructure is only one part of the solution to keep our children safe. More must be done. In 2018, 113 people were killed or injured in school shootings in the U.S. In the same year, at least 1,200 children were killed by gun violence around the country. Gun violence must be addressed both inside and outside of schools to really improve the safety of children in America. We cannot truly improve safety for children until we address these threats, regardless of where they happen. That is why the Democratic-controlled House has passed or moved multiple pieces of legislation aimed at making our children and our country safer, including universal background checks and grants for states who use red flag laws. Additionally, I am proud that on April 1st, 2019, the House passed my bill, the CLASS Act, which would establish a council within DHS to ensure the department coordinates its school safety activities. I hope the Senate will finally act on these measures as the American public awaits a meaningful congressional response. Like the Senate, the Trump administration has failed to consider serious solutions to address school safety. Last year, the administration's Federal Commission on School Safety published a report that included no new proposals for federal policy or funding to make schools safer. Instead, it promoted arming school personnel, a policy that both students and educators groups oppose. Perhaps the only positive outcome from the Commission's work was the decision to establish a federal safety clearinghouse, which the Department of Homeland Security is leading along with the Departments of Education, Justice, Health and Human Services. This committee will be following the rollout of the clearinghouse later this year. I'm interested to hear from the witnesses how such a tool might be useful to them in their work to improve school safety. Additionally, yesterday, the administration published a new planning guide to help school districts develop and maintain and customize emergency operation plans. While such guidance may be useful for districts, it does not address the root problems leading to violence in schools, nor does it provide school districts that are stretched thin new resources to fill their school safety needs. Our children are experiencing a new normal, and one that troubles me. Active shooter drills are the new normal in schools, and while I recognize the importance of them, I'm saddened that our country has come to a place where they are necessary. We must do more to ensure that school violence and shootings are a thing of the past, and our kids feel safe when learning. We must do more to protect the next generation. This country, communities like the ones I serve, and our kids are counting on us. Citizens from across the country are speaking loudly about the need for progress on this subject matter, and we must do our best to respond. With that, now I recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from New York, Mr. King, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the outset, let me also commend Congressman Deutsch for his efforts on this and his dedication ever since both before and ever since the tragedy in this district. So I want to commend you for that. Mr. Chairman, I have a prepared statement. I would just soon introduce this into the record. This is a vital issue, and I would just as soon go and hear the witness's own testimony, and I submit my statement for the record.
Thank you. With that, now I recognize the chairman of the full committee. Mr. Thompson is not here yet. Okay. Other members of the subcommittee are reminded that under the committee rules, opening statements may be submitted for the record. Okay, I want to welcome our panel of witnesses. Our first witness, who may be the youngest witness to appear before this subcommittee, is Lauren Hogg, co-founder of March for Our Lives and a survivor of the school shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Although she may be young, Ms. Hogg is undoubtedly and unfortunately an expert on this topic. I'm thankful she is here testifying for her first congressional hearing to share her experiences. Next, we have Mr. Jared Maples, the Director of New Jersey's Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness. Mr. Maples has appeared before this subcommittee numerous times, and I thank him for coming back. Next, we have Ms. Kathy Martinez-Prather, who is the Director of Texas School Safety Center, which is a part of the Texas State University and has been focused on improving school safety in Texas for the past 20 years. Lastly, we have Mr. Max Schachter, is the founder and CEO of Safe Schools for Alex, an organization he founded after losing his son to the school shooting in Parkland, Florida. Again, thank you for being here today. Without objection, the witnesses' full statements will be inserted into the record. I now ask each witness to summarize his or her statements for 5 minutes, beginning with Ms. Hogg.
Chairman Payne, Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member King, Ranking Member Rogers, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you all for allowing me the opportunity to give a student's perspective on school security. My name is Lauren Hogg, and I'm a co-founder of March for Our Lives, as you just heard, a junior in high school, and simply a concerned student who just wants to survive high school, both metaphorically and literally. I hope that this testimony aids in your efforts to protect students from all zip codes and all races from growing through what myself and my classmates have in the wake of a school shooting. I want to preface my testimony by saying that although I am honored to be here today, I would not be here if not for the horrendous events that took place on February 14th, 2018 at my high school, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. 34 of my classmates, my friends, and my teachers and coaches were injured, 17 of them fatally shot with an AR-15 in our hallways. Additionally, although I am here today using my own experience as evidence against the militarization of schools, I am here not to ask for your sympathy. I'm here to ask for your consideration and your action. I was born after Columbine, and I was 9 years old when Sandy Hook occurred, so for most of my life, I have been force-fed the importance of school security. I still remember the first week back to school after the Sandy Hook shooting took place. I was in 4th grade, and I remember spending the first hour of school watching my teacher's shoes on the rainbow carpet as she tried, to no avail, to explain what a code red drill was to a room of rowdy 4th graders. As blood-chilling as the explanation of new security measures was, I never thought twice about them until 4 years later when my friend Elena posed a question about why we were having the drills in the first place. In 8th grade, Elena Petty sat in front of me in our American history class. If I'm being honest, we never really talked about school security in the context of preventing mass shootings until one day when our friend Austin returned to school after surviving the Fort Lauderdale shooting that previous week. Together, our little friend group contemplated the effectiveness of our school's safety procedures while standing in the adjacent corner of our classroom every 3 months. Nearly a year later, the 3 of us were at school as nervous freshmen on Valentine's Day when once again we went through the code red drill. The only difference was that this time only 2 of us made it home. Elena was 14 years old when she was murdered. The week after Valentine's Day was full of many things. It was full of tears, it was full of funerals, and it was full of much talk around school security. I'll never forget the first morning back at school. When we first arrived to the walkway into our campus, we were welcomed back by what seemed like every armed security officer in the whole county. It was truly a sea of black and blue uniforms. They thought they were making us feel safe, and for that, I'm eternally grateful. But the sight of yet another man holding a gun was enough to make many of us feel sick. Our school, which once was considered a safe haven of learning by many of us, was turned into a place of imprisonment. Additionally, much like our national incarceration system, our school, when flooded with resource officers that ironically were considered safety precautions, became a place where my black and brown classmates were disproportionately penalized and targeted at nearly 3 times the rate of us white students. Simply put, schools, when over-militarized and made to seem like prisons, embed in us students the idea that violence is something to be expected at school. And that is no mindset for any child to learn in. Following the tragedy at my high school, numerous individuals, including the Secretary of Education, looked to increase the presence of firearms in schools. I, as an individual and as a representative of March for Our Lives, strongly oppose the notion that arming teachers will make our schools safer. There is a fine line between proper security and militarization, and as you examine this line, I urge you to consult those most affected, students. Having me here as a witness is an important first step, but students must continue to be consulted. As you examine that line, I urge you to consider non-invasive, proactive measures, not simply punitive, reactive measures. We need to invest in mental health resources of trained mental health professionals rather than relying solely on academic counselors. And to those who suggest the solution is to simply hire more school resource officers or to arm SROs, let me remind you that the armed SRO at my high school did nothing as 17 of my classmates and teachers were murdered. That SRO has in fact been charged with child neglect for his inaction. It was our unarmed football coach, Aaron Feist, who protected my classmates and lost his life in the process. Furthermore, school safety cannot be addressed fully without addressing our nation's gun violence epidemic. Given this, I encourage all of you to look into March for Our Lives' comprehensive bold plan, a peace plan for a safer America. Instead of promoting certain punitive safety measures that I would describe as putting a Band-Aid on us students' bullet wounds, I ask of you to think of what is actually beneficial to us students. I hope with all of my being that gun violence prevention legislation is passed so that perhaps we won't have to be having 16-year-olds speaking at hearings on school safety. Altogether, I hope that when it comes to school security, I won't have to someday hear a student half my age claim that they were born after Marjory Stoneman Douglas and grew up in an environment where they were force-fed the importance of school security until they went through a mass shooting of their own. Us students are tired of being tired. The future of this country is at stake. The future of this country's safety is now in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize Mr. Maples to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Chairman Payne, Ranking Member King, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. It is an honor to speak with you and share the work my office is doing to keep the residents and visitors to New Jersey safe, especially with regard to educational institutions. The New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness is tasked with coordinating counterterrorism, resiliency, and cybersecurity efforts across all levels of government, law enforcement, nonprofit organizations, and the private sector. We are charged with bolstering New Jersey's resources for critical infrastructure, protection, preparedness, training, and federal grants management. Attacks against children and staff in what should be the safe haven of education is perhaps the most jarring threat we face. Recent incidents at schools across the country serve as stark reminders that schools are often targeted by those seeking to commit acts of violence. For example, law enforcement in New Jersey, with the assistance of authorities in Delaware, prevented a potential school shooting this past June when we arrested a man possessing a loaded firearm and additional ammunition at an elementary school in Westfield, New Jersey. The safety of our children and those charged with their care are paramount. We must do all that is necessary to provide students and staff with a sense of comfort and security in their learning environments, and parents and guardians deserve the peace of mind that their children will return to them at the end of the school day. For that reason, Governor Murphy's administration is in sync in combining our resources to ensure the protection of our children. My office's work to protect our students would not be possible without the strong partnerships we have with local, state, and federal agencies. We are proud of the collaborative progress we continue to make as a state in strengthening security throughout all our institutions, including in education. However, we recognize that our work is never complete, and continual improvement is the only way to succeed at protecting New Jersey and the country. While we provide details on our ongoing efforts, please be mindful that we will always seek to continue to improve our approach towards preventing these incidents from occurring in the first place. A focus on prevention is key in stopping an incident before it starts and avoiding the need to employ response tactics. It is our goal to be first preventers as well as first responders and make certain our communities embrace a culture of preparedness that invest equally in both practices. Heightened awareness from citizens and law enforcement, combined with a New Jersey Attorney General directive that calls for local law enforcement agencies who receive tips about suspicious activity to immediately notify my office's Counterterrorism Watch Unit, led to an unprecedented increase in school-related reports to the NJ SARS system. Additionally, our office, along with the FBI Newark Field Office, created high-level thresholds and notification protocols to ensure that all threat-to-life leads, particularly ones that involve schools, are immediately actioned to the appropriate municipal, county, state, and federal law enforcement entities, which allows for a more standardized and faster analysis and expeditious action to mitigate threats. We will continue to prioritize the identification of suspicious activity, as well as ensure there's a clear path for reporting and addressing issues before an incident can occur through a whole-of-government approach. We will expand innovative efforts through measures such as training school personnel, including administrators, faculty, school resource officers, custodians, and bus drivers, and the community as a whole on how to recognize and report suspicious activity. My agency also collaborated with the Department of Education and University Hospital to provide in-person training for school safety specialists and to distribute more than 18,000 bleed control kits to school districts throughout New Jersey. Through unannounced active shooter drills throughout the state, we can test and gauge the effectiveness of both plans and actions of students, faculty, and staff in an environment that is controlled but realistic. We also continue to conduct large-scale active shooter exercises for K through 12 schools, ensuring that everyone, including school children, know what actions to take if they face emergency situations. With that in mind, New Jersey colleges and universities participate in a quarterly mass gathering working group that is aimed at identifying and addressing those common vulnerabilities and filling any capability gaps at locations where students gather throughout the state. We created a school security subcommittee on the state's Domestic Security Preparedness Task Force, which I chair, to coordinate best practices across state agencies and relevant stakeholders and integrate with national priorities and local needs. Lastly, my office and the New Jersey State Police, in coordination with county and local partners, conduct physical security assessments at schools, as well as provide training to local law enforcement agencies to increase the capability to conduct assessments across the state. One of the biggest safety and security challenges facing many educational institutions throughout New Jersey is funding. Legislation introduced by Chairman Payne, H.R. 6920, would provide dedicated federal funding under current grant funding programs of at least $90 million every year that is earmarked strictly for school security. This funding would greatly assist schools throughout the country, including New Jersey, adding resources that would enable schools to meet the very goals we have set out to achieve in the areas of prevention and response. In conclusion, efforts such as the Mass Gathering Working Group, community outreach initiatives, and the countless trainings and exercises our office conducts each year highlight that we will do all that is necessary to ensure the safety and security of the residents and visitors of New Jersey, protecting them from terrorist threats to our public spaces. We remain dedicated to continuing these efforts, to further collaborating with our partners, and to work towards addressing threats with a focus on prevention. Chairman Payne, Ranking Member King, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I thank you again for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to your questions and yield back to the chairman.
Thank you for your testimony, sir. I now recognize Ms. Martinez-Prather to summarize her statement for 5 minutes.
Chairman Payne, Ranking Member King, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the topic of school safety and for your leadership in making school safety a priority and a critical part of the educational agenda for all of our schools across the country. I'm the director of the Texas School Safety Center at Texas State University, and I'm here to discuss the efforts of the center to support schools in effectively carrying out school safety mandates and best practices in Texas, the importance of prevention efforts in developing a comprehensive approach to school safety, and the impact that community violence also have in our schools. As you're aware, every day our schools face challenges that have the potential to impede the learning process for our students. And these challenges can range from human-caused acts of violence to natural disasters to more frequent safety issues that our schools deal with every single day. The tragic events in Santa Fe, Texas, and Parkland, Florida, and countless others that have impacted our nation's schools continue to remind us that we have a lot of work to do, and we all need to continue to work and collaborate to ensure that our students have a safe place to learn and thrive. The Texas School Safety Center was created in 1999 following the Columbine school shooting. The center is tasked in the Texas Education Code and the Governor's Homeland Security Strategic Plan to serve as the central clearinghouse for the dissemination of school safety information, including training, research, and technical assistance for all K-12 districts, charter schools, and community colleges across the state. The center has a governor-appointed board of directors that represent practitioners such as teachers, principals, superintendents, school board members, school-based law enforcement, and parents, all who provide a diverse perspective to inform the work that we do. Texas has approximately 1,025 school districts. That includes over 9,000 individual campuses, 700 charter schools, and 50 community colleges, all serving over 5.3 million students. Texas schools are charged currently with several school safety mandates. Some of those include the adoption and implementation of a multi-hazard emergency operations plan, providing for employee training in responding to an emergency, conducting drills and exercises to prepare students and employees, including substitute teachers, for responding to an emergency, conducting an audit of all of their district facilities once every 3 years, and establishing a school safety and security committee. This last Texas legislative session, our state passed significant school safety mandates to further enhance the posture of safety in our Texas schools. Those mandates I will highlight. School districts, charter schools, and community colleges must submit their multi-hazard emergency operation plans now for review and verification to the School Safety Center, with the opportunity for the center to provide feedback and for the school district to make corrective action. Each school district also must now establish a behavioral threat assessment team to serve each campus of the district. And then a licensed architect will also be another school safety board member to inform and prioritize the critical role that school design plays to uphold a positive, safe, and learning environment. Our Commissioner of Education has to also adopt facility standards for schools that provide for a safe and secure learning environment. On May 18, 2018, Santa Fe High School was the target of a senseless attack taking the lives of 10 people, 8 students and 2 teachers. While the high school and school district, as well as the community, continue to recover from this tragic event, the state of Texas also continues to make school safety a priority. The center knows that schools face many threats, hazards, and vulnerabilities, and although an active attack is rare, the impact is no doubt catastrophic. That's why we take a comprehensive approach to school safety. We provide training, develop tools and resources for schools on how to prevent and or mitigate, as well as respond to and recover from any type of threat or hazard that could arise. School architecture and design is one of those key mitigation strategies. To be clear, this is not about installing cameras and metal detectors, although that may be appropriate for some schools. This is about designing schools to be learning spaces first, ones that contain minimally invasive but effective security measures. And this best practice ensures that whether a building is new or existing, its physical features do not negatively impact teachers, students, or the community at large. The center also stresses to schools the importance of prevention efforts in the overall comprehensive approach to school safety. As I mentioned earlier, Texas now requires school districts to have behavioral threat assessment teams, and responding to an active shooter event or knowing what to do if an intruder enters the building are skills that students, teachers, and administrators, unfortunately, need to practice and perfect. However, we know that educators are most interested in being preventative and proactive, not reactive. And after a violent event occurs in our schools, educators, parents, community members, and legislators want to know what we could have done to have this event prevented. Research of U.S. school shootings has shown that these events can be prevented because the acts are typically planned in advance. The actors tell others beforehand about their violent plans, and the acts are often carried out because there is a level of desperation or the review that violence is the only option left to solve problems. Behavioral threat assessment provides a proactive, evidence-based approach for identifying individuals who may pose a threat to themselves or others, intervening with appropriate resources, and ultimately improving the safety and well-being of the individual of concern, the situation, and the school. The goal of threat assessment is not to punish the child. It's not intended to be an adversarial process, but to connect them with the appropriate interventions they need so a threat can be averted. Lastly, I want to bring attention to the impact that community violence has on schools. Most recently, On August 3rd, 2019, a gunman in El Paso, Texas, entered a Walmart and took the lives of 22 people, including a student from a nearby school district. Weeks later, on August 31st, a gunman senselessly killed 7 people throughout the Midland, Odessa community, including a student from a nearby school district. And although these were not school shootings, they had a significant impact on the school districts in those communities. As mentioned, 2 of those individuals killed were students and many others either friends or family members and in some way connected to the school district. In the aftermath of these acts of violence, many of the school districts in these communities were provided resources to assist with counseling for students, staff, and parents, which in some districts still continues today. I want to finally communicate that school safety is a shared responsibility that involves school boards, superintendents, principals, teachers, mental health professionals, law enforcement, architects, state agencies and organizations, parents, students, and policymakers. By ensuring that our schools are safe and healthy learning environments, we give our children the opportunity to excel academically, emotionally, and socially. Again, thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize Mr. Schachter to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
My name is Max Schachter. My son, Alex, was one of 17 people that were brutally murdered at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School last year. After I buried my son, my priority was to make sure that my other 3 children were safe in their schools. I have spent the past year advocating for national school safety best practices that can be recognized at the federal level and housed a school safety website and made available to all schools. My goal is to make it as easy as possible for schools to be as safe as possible. I'm pleased to see the President's Federal Commission on School Safety report recommend development of this clearinghouse, and the Department of Homeland Security, along with other federal agencies, have been working extremely hard to implement this recommendation. I recently reviewed a demonstration of the DHS new school safety clearinghouse website. It's schoolsafety.gov, and I was extremely impressed as well. I hope once the website is launched, there will be an aggressive outreach campaign to schools and school districts so they take advantage of this information as quickly as possible. 2 areas that this committee can have the most impact are in the areas of grants and emergency communications. With regards to grants can be used, so I understand that FEMA preparedness grants can be used today by local jurisdictions to support school safety enhancements. I recommend this committee consider ways to ensure FEMA grant dollars that are used for school safety are used to implement the best practices identified on the DHS School Safety Clearinghouse website, and that they should be used on the most basic safety enhancements before anything else. Expensive technology upgrades should take a back seat to common sense measures that enhance security. With regard to emergency communications, in Parkland, the first responder radios failed and were not interoperable, delaying help for victims who were dying on the 3rd floor waiting for medical attention. SWAT teams had to resort to using hand signals to avoid shooting each other because their radios failed. The 9/11 Commission report highlighted this problem at the Pentagon and at Ground Zero, and nearly 20 years later, the same problem plagued our first responders at my son's school. This is not acceptable, and it has to stop. Congress can't force all first responder agencies to use a single radio system, but you can incentivize agencies to become instantly interoperable as soon as an incident happens, regardless of what radio system you're using. In addition to grants and communications improvements, I recommend Congress pass the EAGLES Act to reauthorize the U.S. Secret Service's National Threat Assessment Center so that they can expand the reach to help states develop threat assessment programs. These programs can identify students that exhibit concerning behavior and get them the help they need before they commit acts of targeted violence. I also support the TAPS Act, which would result in a DHS-led process to develop threat assessment capabilities at the broadest level across the United States. The Secret Service uses threat assessment teams to protect the president, The Capitol Hill Police uses threat assessment teams to protect you in Congress. Our children deserve the same protection. In my view, the reason school shootings have been an epidemic for the last 2 decades is, number one, parents and community members have a mindset that it can't happen here. That false sense of security is partly due to the fact that schools are not being honest with the public about violence on their campus. Additionally, schools are not successfully establishing a positive culture and climate, as in many cases results in bullying, which can lead to school mass murder. We need to do a better job of teaching kids the tools to deal with their anger, rejection, and failure later in life. Florida has implemented laws to gain school district compliance, but I believe the most effective strategy to doing this is public pressure to make school districts prioritize safety and security. Unfortunately, there is no school safety rating system that currently exists to tell parents whether or not their school is safe. When parents go online to look at ratings of K through 12, many of them have an A rating. They don't realize that that is just academics. Academics are important, but if the children do not come home from their school every day, nothing else matters. The car industry's crash test rating has improved car safety and decreased fatalities, but for parents, there is no way to know if their child's school is safe. I believe a school safety rating system would influence change nationwide. It has been 20 years since Columbine, and children continue to be murdered in their classroom. Unfortunately, we know that the next school mass murder is already out there. It is not a question of if, it is a question of when. We know what can be done to prevent it, and we know what must be done to mitigate the risk of more lives lost. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
I'd like to thank all the witnesses for their testimony. I'll remind each member that he or she will have 5 minutes to question the panel. I will now recognize myself for questions. Ms. Hogg, I want to take a minute before I ask my question to show a video that the March on Our Lives put out about active shooter drills in schools and the reality of what kids are going through today. For context, this is a real student and was not scripted. So let us play the video, please.
All right, so good morning. Welcome to today's team building event. Today, we're going to be learning what to do in the event of an active shooter. We're going to bring in a special guest. She's actually an expert on this, and she's going to be leading our team building event. This is Kaylee.
If there was an active shooter, you'd all be dead. When you talk out loud, the shooter can tell where you are and where you're hiding. Sometimes we play the game who can stay quietest the longest, so we all remember. You can try and protect your friends by pushing the tables and chairs against the doors. You also have to put a piece of paper over the door window so they can't see in. And you can't cry. It gives away your position and your hiding spot. And if you're in the bathrooms, you have to stand on the toilet seat and crunch down so they can't see your feet and they can't see your head, so they don't know that you're in there.
That's crazy.
Try to listen for things that could help the police. For example, if you hear a lot of bangs like bang, 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 the shooter might be down the hall. Or if you hear louder ones like bang, 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 he could be right outside your door. If the shooter comes in the room, screaming won't do anything. You have to try and fight back. If you can't escape, we get taught the emergency window escape plan, where you have to break a window, put clothes over the frame, and climb through. Our teacher used to sing a song to make it easy to remember. Lockdown, lockdown, let's all hide. Lock the doors and stay inside. Crouch on down, don't make a sound, and don't cry or you'll be found.
Ms. Hogg, can you tell the subcommittee what goes through your mind when you see this video, and what should Congress be doing to help ensure kids are safe in schools rather than putting the responsibility on kids to become experts in active shooter situations?
So I was grateful enough to be able to be part of the creation team on this video. And I remember when I first saw it, the first thing that came to mind is myself. I saw myself in that little girl that was giving that training because that was me. That's been me my whole life. As I said, I was born after Columbine. And we learn those little rhymes, nursery rhyme things that are supposed to teach you how to try and survive when somebody comes into your school to murder you. Additionally, I think there are many things that can be done that I addressed in my testimony. But I think, of course, I will always say this, the first step, although it may be difficult, is to address the gun violence epidemic. Additionally, like I said, we must invest money into school mental health resources. And we cannot just say again, or hear again, on my perspective, members of Congress say that they're going to do something about mental health, because I completely agree with that, but then do absolutely nothing. I've seen what it's like. I am still in school. And I think for many people, many legislators like yourselves, school is different these days, probably, than when you went to school. There's so many extended pressures, extra pressures that we deal with every single day. So I really would push mental health. And I think you need to have those conversations with mental health professionals themselves to see what works best. Yeah, I think, like I said, with that video, all I saw was myself. Growing up, because that was me and that still is me, and it probably will forever be me because that's what I was taught as I was learning my ABCs. So.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me thank all the witnesses, especially Ms. Hogg and Mr. Schachter, for being here today and trying to make something positive out of something so horrible. So I want to thank you for that. Director Maples, let me lead off with you. First of all, thank you for your work in Homeland Security from a neighboring state. I know the work you do, and I'm very appreciative of that.
Thank you.
You mentioned training programs from grants. Do you think those programs are successful in preventing violence, and are schools implementing them?
So the training programs that we have existing in New Jersey, one of the biggest focus areas for us is on that preventative part. Mm-hmm. So we're really focusing on everything from bus drivers to custodians to teachers to students, as far as if a classmate is demonstrating, or a person they know in the community is demonstrating behavioral indicators, that they should report that. And so part of the training becomes, one, recognizing what those behaviors are, and two, where to go with the information in a way that maintains everyone's rights, but it allows us to look into it and work with mental health professionals, the school district, the law enforcement part, et cetera. So from that perspective, we are implementing those across the state.
Do you find the school districts taking it seriously?
We do. In New Jersey, we definitely have, I'm sure there's some outliers, or there definitely are outliers, but we continually work with them, with the Department of Education, to make sure that that training gets out there and they are taking it seriously.
Mr. Schachter, along those lines, again, thank you for your testimony. You basically discussed the lack of concern that too many school districts have had, and you've spoken all over the country now. Do you find that the concern is increasing? Is there still an apathy in certain districts thinking it's never going to hit them?
It depends. If you've had a school shooting in your community, you're hyper vigilant, but many school districts around this country still think it's not going to happen to them. And there's no way for parents to know whether or not your school is safe. There are so many things that we can do today that are low cost, no cost, that have been implemented in Florida. Just to give you an example, in Broward County, which is the 6th largest school district in the country, we didn't even have a formal active assailant response policy. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas did not conduct a code red drill for several years prior to the shooting. So they didn't train their teachers, they didn't train their staff what to do in an emergency. And if, God forbid, an active shooter walks into your campus, what happens to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas? It's a lot of dead people, and that needs to change. So in Florida, we have mandated, we've come to the realization that schools are not going to do the right thing. They have failed to protect our children. And in Florida, we've mandated that schools implement drills. We've mandated every one of them has to have an active assailant response policy. They all have to train, and training in a lockdown, which is what many schools are doing, is just teaching the next school shooter exactly where to go. We need to be training them and giving them options-based training so that they have lots of different options if, God forbid, something happens. So I'm extremely happy that we've got the school safety website coming live, but we need more schools to be able to access that information and make their schools safe. There's still a lot of apathy in this country.
Is there any resistance, or is it just apathy?
I think for
other people don't want to hear about it. I remember, like, for instance, when the heroin epidemic was starting, many schools didn't want to admit that there was a heroin epidemic. They didn't want to admit it was in their district. They were afraid what was going to happen in the next school budget or what the rating of the school would be. Do you find any resistance like that when it comes to gun safety?
There is a culture to underreport violence on campus. Just to give you an example, in Broward County at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, between 2014 to 2017, they reported 0 assaults, 0 threats, 0 intimidation. These are all not true and lies. So we need accurate reporting of violence on campus. Bullying can lead to mass murder. We need to be able to know what's happening on our campus so we can help the children. We can reduce violence on campus, and that will make all children safe. That will make communities safe. And it's a cooperative effort. So it's working with law enforcement inside the community, inside the schools.
Thank you for your dedication and for your eloquence. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Rose.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hogg, thank you for showing the courage to come here today. Do you think we've done enough, Congress?
I mean, I think if you would have done enough, we wouldn't have to be having this conversation today, right? Just to be frank with you. I think if we did enough, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have lost my friends. Lots of people back in my community in Florida would not have lost their children or their loved ones. I think there's much more that needs to be done. I appreciate, as I stated in my testimony, you allowing me to be here today because that's the first step. But I think there's a myriad of things that we need to work on, like I said. And I believe part of school safety is implementing proactive measures that include things like gun violence prevention. And that's something that so often is not wanted to be something that's talked about. But I think we need to remember, I think one of the greatest things you all can do as congressmen and women is continue to have young people who are being affected by this be at the forefront of these conversations.
I want to get a sense of what you and your friends who went through this horrific crisis think about us in Washington, D.C. If Parkland happened tomorrow, again.
It might at a different school.
It might.
Yeah.
If Sandy Hook happened again tomorrow somewhere else, do you think we would act?
With in regards to school safety?
And gun control?
I hope one day you will. Unfortunately, if that takes until people my age are in your positions who have grown up learning school safety procedures and losing loved ones to gun violence, if you guys don't act, eventually I know things will happen because people my age who have been continuously traumatized by instances of gun violence, whether that be within regards to in-school or out-of-school gun violence, and especially communities of color, we're going to be the legislators sitting in your seats. We're going to be the ones who have lived through this, who will have to make these changes. So if trying to imagine a world where school shootings aren't a thing that happened to myself is like trying to describe a color to a blind man. I mean, this has been my normal my whole life. It's unfortunate, but it has. I mean, I think if Sandy Hook or Stoneman Douglas happened tomorrow, I'm not sure if many of congressmen and congresswomen today would do anything unless it was their own child or their own loved one who was taken to gun violence.
Ms. Hogg, I don't think you and your friends at this point have any reason to trust us. I think I share your sentiments. I don't know how much more blood has to be spilled in this country. I don't know how many more children have to be afraid to go to school. I don't know how many more parents have to hug their kids before they go to school, fearing that they're not going to come home before we do something. This is as sad as it gets. And you're right, it may have to come to you and your friends replacing us up here before we actually act. Ms. Hogg, as you think about your teachers that you've had, do you think that they are capable during another Parkland of discharging a weapon in your defense?
I think it's not their responsibility. I come from a family of teachers, and I think when they went to college, when they went to school to become an educator, they weren't thinking that part of their job was going to have to be a security officer. Like I stated in my testimony once before, we had an armed officer at my school. And when it came to that moment of fight or flight, he went away. So the idea that teachers having guns would solve this issue is the same idea as giving another person a gun to solve gun violence is the issue, if you know what I'm saying. And when we hear those things like 2 guns will protect the majority of people from one bad guy with a gun, that's kind of just sounding like we're trying to turn every single individual, or in this case, every single teacher, into an armed vigilante. And that's something that no teacher should have to be. And also, I just cannot imagine if teachers were armed, the amount of incidences that would take place that would be them killing a student who didn't happen to be the perpetrator of the violence. And I think there would just be more violence coming out of that if teachers were armed.
Thank you, Ms. Hogg, for your testimony, and thank you for your leadership. I wish there were more folks around here like you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Joyce. Oh, I'm sorry. He's gone. Recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Crenshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Mr. Schachter, thank you for being here. You're doing a great justice to your son's memory by looking for the right solutions to this. You answered a lot of my questions because your testimony was so exact. You mentioned the National Best Practices Clearing and the schoolsafety.gov being a great first step, but you said that there's going to be an issue with how well we get that information out to schools. Do you have any recommendations on the best way to do that? And I'd like to, Ms. Martinez-Prather, to also answer that question. What's the next step after, and Mr. Maples as well, what's the next step after what are deemed to be pretty good next steps, or pretty good solutions already?
The first thing that we're lacking is, at the end of October, that website's going to go live. So, there's going to be a lot of great resources on that website. It's very interactive, so schools will be able to go on there, answer a series of questions to see where they are in the process of making their school safe. And then that website will walk you through the process. It'll tell you where your gaps are, where your deficiencies are, and then we'll actually direct you to grant dollars. To give you an example, one of the deficiencies that we have currently is that a lot of our grant programs, they're not implementing best practices. So what I would like to see is that once we have these best practices, once the website goes live, tie those best practices to the grant dollars. We want to make sure that schools are implementing the most effective measures to make schools safe. We don't want schools implementing just some shiny object that's not really going to have an impact.
So the issue isn't necessarily that there's not enough grants or not the right grants. The issue is that we're not tying that grant money to the right basic practices. And you mentioned this too about what are the basic measures, not the fancy bells and whistles, but what are the basic measures? Can you answer that as well? And that's the next question I have for you both as well. Thank you.
So as far as low-cost, no-cost measures, for instance, just having a formal active assailant response policy. I mean, to think that the 6th largest school district in the country didn't have it, I'm sure there's a lot of other schools around this country that don't have a simple policy. And, you know, to train your teachers and staff. These are low-cost measures. Training your staff to lock your doors, to teach with a locked door, identifying a safer corner in the classroom, that children know where to go in an emergency. And then it's encouraging students to report violent threats. Kids know who puts something on Snapchat or Instagram. We need to encourage them to see something, say something, but more importantly, do something with that information that they know about. And then one of the problems at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas is law enforcement that responded did not have access to live actionable intelligence. The school district used FERPA to not share cameras with law enforcement. So when they came on scene, they didn't know where the shooter was. It took them 11 minutes to get into the first floor and 40 minutes to get to the 3rd floor to administer medical attention to the 10 kids that were shot and dying on the 3rd floor. And, as far as getting the word out, we need to work with every state school safety center to get that information out and populate it as broadly as possible.
Okay, and we have one of those right here. Ms. Martinez-Prather, could you expand on that? And also tell us about the threat behavioral assessments that Texas uses. Is there any metrics or any successes there we can speak of?
Yes, sir. Well, regarding the Federal Clearinghouse, what's great about that is that it's an interagency effort. And so oftentimes from a state perspective, you have multiple agencies working on this effort in good faith, saying different things, and that confuses school districts. And our role at the state level is to bring all that together, synthesize it, incorporate Texas considerations, because we have a pretty comprehensive mandates for schools to follow, and push that back out to school districts. So I think that it's great that all of the agencies are working together on this effort. I think that's going to help with clear lines of communication and guidance. As far as Texas really took a page from the state of Virginia in passing its behavioral threat assessment legislation this session, with this idea of prevention really needing to have a focus. It's part of that comprehensive piece. In the center, we focus on mitigation prevention primarily. And the idea here is we're creating a culture of situational awareness where students trust adults. They know they can go to somebody. They know they're not snitching on another peer, because we know that they have that intel. They have that information to share. And most oftentimes they don't, for various reasons. But knowing that they're able to report that information, knowing that that individual is going to get help. And we always stress that it's not intended to be a means of engaging exclusionary discipline. In Texas, there are going to be several pieces of data that will have to be collected, in which our state education agency will be overseeing in terms of who's on that behavioral threat assessment team, because the big focus here is that it has to be multidisciplinary. It's not just the school principal. It's not just the school counselor. You have your campus administration, a law enforcement officer, a mental health professional, a teacher. Depending on the situation, it's fluid. You may bring in an ad hoc member that has a close relationship with the student. The idea here is that it captures pre-incident indicators or alarming behaviors that may not just be leading to an act of violence. It could be a student who is, threatening harm to themselves. May be behaviors of change that show there may be a substance abuse problem. Maybe there's trauma experienced at home. So how can...
Please wrap up your answer, please.
I'm sorry? Oh, yes.
No, you could
Sorry about that. But
We only get 5 minutes.
it's a long answer, but that's where Texas is going in terms of its threat assessment.
Okay, well, my time is up. Thank you all for being here. I'm sorry I didn't get to everyone. Thank you all for being here. It takes a lot of guts, especially at a young age, to come here, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we'll recognize the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Underwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Children should be free to live their lives and go to school without the fear of gun violence. Unfortunately, this is not a reality for the 58 million students who are in their first weeks of a new school year. Just this Tuesday, students from Cortland Elementary School in my district participated in their first active shooter drill of the year. This is one of the many active shooter drills and trainings students and teachers will participate in this year to prepare for a day we all hope will never come. Mr. Schachter, thank you so much for being here to honor your son and protect communities around the country. Ms. Hogg, thank you so much for joining us here today and sharing your experience. Thank you for your leadership. You, your brother, and your fellow advocates are an incredible inspiration to me. I also applaud March for Our Lives' Peace Plan for a Safer America, which makes a number of recommendations to help ensure our communities are safe from gun violence. When I reviewed your plan, I was especially glad to see that it includes expanding background checks and dedicating annual funding for gun violence prevention research, proposals that I'm proud the House has passed this year. These are just the first in a series of necessary steps. So, Ms. Hogg, in your testimony, you encourage investments in mental health resources in schools. Can you tell us more about why these investments are so important to students like you?
Well, thank you for that. I feel kind of hyped up. So I think I've said this, I'm just going to reiterate some things that I've said before. Like I said, we need non-aggressive proactionary measures, because when we put in these measures, by that I mean security measures and not mental health measures, it's almost as if us students are being punished for the ways of the world to protect us. And punishment to protect is something that's been shown to be ineffective. Additionally, we must not be suffocated by school security measures, and by having trained mental health professionals there, I think that is helping. I think that's decreasing the amount of suffocation that these increased security measures are causing. I think when it comes to school security specifically, mental health professionals can help us deal with the increase of security due to the ways of the world, like I said, the lack of action around gun violence prevention. I think specific mental health counselors, not just guidance counselors, because I cannot tell you the amount of times before even the shooting that happened at my school, I went to my guidance counselor, and the ratio of guidance counselor to student number is something that is outrageous to me. I remember I didn't do the math until after, and at a school, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, was about 4,500 kids. There were like 4 or 5 guidance counselors. So I remember my guidance counselor did not know my name until after the shooting when I went to her to ask for help. And then again, I had to schedule towards the end of the week because she said she was busy because it was when spring was and she was trying to get kids into college. But really, mental health professionals have helped me so much. And even then, I mean, I had some difficulty with the mental health professionals that were put in place at my school as a reactive measure after the shooting that occurred. But we have to ensure that, especially if it's in the post of a school shooting, these people are trauma trained.
Yes.
Because if you put a guidance counselor who spends a majority of their time doing academic counseling into a situation where kids have watched their friends be murdered and bleed out on the floor next to them, it doesn't work. Trying to get a kid into college and trying to explain to the kid why they saw what they saw is something that's impossible.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
After the conversation around keeping our schools safe has to include a discussion on how we can ensure that students feel safe again at school after the traumatic events, as you just described. Last year, the Washington Post had an analysis which found that 187,000 students have been exposed to gun violence at school since Columbine. We're facing a future in which hundreds of thousands of Americans will be carrying these physical and mental scars for the rest of their lives. Can you talk a little bit and briefly about the long-term challenges that you and your classmates face in the aftermath of the shooting? We touched on the trauma, but anything else that you want to share with the committee today?
Yeah, I mean, additionally, when it comes to what you guys can do to help in aiding in trauma, the first thing you can do is address gun violence as an issue and take action on that, because at least for my trauma, and I know many other of my friends and other victims of gun violence, every single week when another shooting happens, and we see it on the news, whether it be a mass shooting or a local shooting in a community nearby, we're re-traumatized. Yeah. We feel as though we're back in the moment that we went through a shooting of ourselves, and those stages of grief restart every single week. Every single week, sorry, I'm continuing on, but every single week I watch CBS Sunday Morning, and they usually address school shootings when they happen. And so every single Sunday for a long time, and that's been a family tradition of mine since I was like 5 years old watching that, I had to stop watching it because I would hear the stories of the people that went through the school shootings every single Sunday, and I could no longer do it because I wouldn't be ready to go to school the next day mentally. So that's the first thing you can do, addressing gun violence as an epidemic.
Yes, Ms. Hogg, thank you. As a nurse, I know it's not uncommon for people who have lived through school shootings to experience post-traumatic stress and other traumas. This is especially true for children, and we're going to work to address it. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here, and I yield back my time.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Guest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also have an experience with school shootings. As a prosecutor, I had the opportunity to be involved in the investigation and preparing a case for trial of one of the first school shootings in the country, the Pearl High School shooting. On October 1st, 1997, Luke Woodham, early that morning, killed his mother before going to school. He then concealed a rifle in an overcoat, entered Pearl High School, where he then opened fire on multiple students, killing Christina Menifee and Lydia Dew and injuring 7 other students. I'm also aware of the mental health aspect because Luke Woodham also had mental health issues and attempted at trial to claim that the jury should find him not guilty by reason of insanity. The jury rejected that claim, and even though the jury found that he did suffer from mental illness, that mental illness did not arise to the level where he should not be held responsible for his actions. And Luke Woodham today is currently serving 3 life sentences plus 140 years. But one of the actions on that day was an action by one of the school administrators. The school administrator who was there in the school, when the school administrator heard gunfire, he immediately went to his vehicle, he obtained his firearm, and he was able to apprehend Luke Woodham before he left the campus that day. I will tell you from my investigation and my working with law enforcement, we believe and are very confident that his actions that day saved additional lives. Because of his prompt response, because there was additional rounds of ammunition, Luke Woodham would have continued this rampage if he would not have been apprehended very quickly. I'm aware that in response to Parkland, that recently, earlier this year, the legislature in Florida passed a law which was signed by the governor that would allow school officials in Florida to be armed. It expands what they call in Florida the Guardian Program. And that program, though, does set forth stipulations. Those stipulations include, one, that the school district must approve the measures. So therefore, schools are not required to do that, but schools have the option to opt in. 2, teachers must volunteer for the program. No one is required to participate, but teachers have the opportunity to volunteer. They must undergo background checks, there must be psychiatric evaluations, and there also must be specific training by law enforcement to make sure that teachers are trained. And so, Mr. Maples, my question to you is, do you believe that the response by the Florida legislature in allowing school districts to opt into a system that I've just referred to, do you believe that should be part of this discussion that we are having as it relates to school violence and school shootings?
So let me start out by saying this is an incredibly complex issue, the school safety in general. I think that's pretty clear from the testimony and certainly from all of your questions. As part of what we're trying to do in New Jersey, and that's the only thing I can answer to is the New Jersey aspect of this, we're looking at every solution out there, whether it be the gun violence prevention, whether it be measures like arming teachers. We're looking at everything. But I will tell you that the very first steps, and I think Mr. Crenshaw asked a question about what are the next steps that we take. It has to be about that initial training, exactly what Mr. Schachter was talking about, adhering to those best practices, the plan. No plan survives first contact. That's something we used to say in my community, and I worked at CIA for most of my career protecting people. That's what I did. And no plan survives first contact. So we have to have a plan in place. And until, one great example of this, I think, is you could have the best SWAT team in the world on standby in the east wing of a school like Stoneman Douglas. And if somebody lets him in the back door on another wing, people are going to die. And it's an unfortunate consequence of that. So we have to talk about locking the doors, as Mr. Schachter said, teaching kids not to open the doors. So I will tell you that while we looked at those, we really want to make sure those fundamental, foundational aspects are in place first and foremost, and we'll get to that conversation.
And I would agree with you. You know, our first mission should be that our children, when we put them on the bus or parents drop them off at schools, that even before those children are educated, that they return home safely to their families. And so I understand that. And I have worked with law enforcement, and I have worked with other groups to try to make our schools safe. And first and foremost, we want to be able to prevent anyone from going on to the school to accomplish any act of violence. And I understand that. And there are multiple programs, and we are talking about prevention. But in the case where someone does enter onto the school grounds and where there is an active shooter situation, do you believe that laws such as those passed in Florida, should those be things that we are also talking about? Should that be part of the discussion, the overall global discussion on how we are going to protect our children? I have a sophomore in high school, and every day when he goes to school, I am confident he is going to return. But I know, just as you've talked about as well, we always say it's not going to happen in our community. That's going to happen somewhere else. That's not going to happen in my school. I've seen firsthand it happen in my community. I know about it. And so my question is, once we get past the things that we're going to try to do to, first of all, prevent, is Army teachers, should that be something that we should consider as a last resort to make sure that we can stop the shooting as quickly as possible?
Just to simply sum up, as part of looking and addressing at everything, I think we should have the conversation about everything. Whatever we can do to support and protect our students, but recognizing that things like training, things like real world, pulling the trigger is a very difficult thing to do, and making sure that somebody's prepared to do that. And I think Ms. Hogg summed it up as far as teachers are there to teach. And so it can be a big challenge for them to adopt a mindset that they're then a protector in that way with a weapon, for example. So yes, we should consider everything on the table and have reasonable discourse about it, 100%. But as a last measure, is at the end of that conversation, once you hit the fundamentals, then I think we should have that conversation, again, very carefully, because there are a lot of challenges associated with it, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for going over, and I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized, Mr. Richmond.
Let me thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening this hearing today on a very complex but serious matter. And I would just respond to my colleague, Mr. Guest, that we are really just all a product of our life experiences, and it shape how we think of things. And I know the conversation about Army teachers. I coached high school baseball, and Mr. Schachter mentioned interoperability and the ability to communicate. I would, in my life experience, I would have grave concern as a baseball coach if there was an active shooter situation about what happens if I have a gun and the perpetrator has a gun and the police officers get there and have to decide who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. In my experience, most times, people, especially police, assume that I'm the bad guy, and that would worry me. But I don't think it's something that we can't have a conversation about, and I think interoperability is important. And we went through that after Hurricane Katrina, where we lost 1,500 people, that we could not talk to each other. And the fact that when these incidents occur, you can't talk to each other is very scary. And that part of the conversation is really about limiting the carnage. I really want us to focus on preventing it in the first place. And so when we have that conversation, I think there are small steps we can take, such as universal background checks, things of that nature, limiting the size of ammunition magazines, if we're talking about limiting carnage. But my question for you, Ms. Hogg, would be that, do you think students are ready for a see something, say something approach, which has made this country safer in airports and to terrorism? And the question would be, do you think our students are ready for an approach like a see something, say something?
First of all, thank you for that question. I think it's really important in this conversation. So I can speak on behalf of myself, but not every student, of course. But for myself, how I personally feel about the whole idea of see something, say something, is that although it is important, although it can prevent major things like what happened at my school, it puts a certain pressure on the student as though it is our responsibility to take care of these things. And after something happens, like what happened at my school, oftentimes I feel as though students felt as though they were being the ones being accountable for the government and police officers in action at my school. So as much as I think it's important, and I think it's a good way, a good non-invasive, pretty non-invasive way of preventing these things from happening, I genuinely do not think it's drastic enough. And additionally, much like what happened with increased security at places like airports and everywhere else after everything that happened in September of 2001, I think we need to acknowledge that there are always, when you have that situation, to see something, say something, there's going to be personal biases that are injected into the minds, the souls of individuals who are being the ones who are supposed to be seeing something and saying something. And I think that leads to a lot of danger within regards to whether that be a student seeing something and saying something about a student maybe just because of their personal bias, personal racial bias, or personal ideologic bias, if you know what I'm saying.
I do, and I think that something this complex and something this drastic, we really do need a belt and suspenders type approach to it. So whether that's more school counselors who would also have an obligation to see something or say something where there's a concern. I look at it how we fight terrorism in this country, and we do it with intelligence and information gathering. And I think that at some point we all have, unfortunately, we all have that responsibility, and we would hope that people don't bring in their personal bias, but it's America. We're humans, and I think that, you know, it's a problem. And as much as we can prepare for the active shooter situation, what we really want is to prevent it. And I will just tell you, as a parent who drops a kid off to kindergarten every day that I'm possible, I am very fearful that he doesn't go home. And as I bought his school uniforms this year, and Mr. Schechter, I'm sure that you've had to go through this, especially because you have other children. I had to make a decision, do I buy the Kevlar square that goes in the backpack so that I can teach him to hide behind it in case of an active shooter situation? Parents shouldn't have to be doing that. When I was in high school, our drills consisted of stop, drop, and roll. And now the drills that our children are going through are run, hide, and fight. And so the real thing is that we as Americans also have to accept our responsibility as adults to the divide, to the hate, to the bullying, and to all the other things that are adding to this sense. Because if it's not in a school, then it'll be in a church like Mother Emanuel. If it's not in a church like Mother Emanuel, it'll be Tree of Life Synagogue. If it's not there, it'll be at a Safeway store where our colleague Gabby Giffords was shot. And if it's not at a grocery store, it'll be on a baseball field where our colleague Steve Scalise was shot. So we really, and we have to protect our most vulnerable, which is our children. But we have to do a better job as Americans of leading, loving, and showing the leadership to prevent this. So I think you all did your part today by being here, and I think Congress needs to do our part by enacting those reasonable measures that can stop these things before they start. So thank you for being here.
I'd like to thank the gentleman, and you know, it is unfortunate that this year one of the highest selling products in New Jersey for going back to school were bulletproof book bags. I now recognize the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Clark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I thank our panelists for really lending your expertise and your common sense concerns to today's discussion. Columbine, Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook, Umpqua Community College, Parkland. Each time our nation experiences another school shooting, we send out our thoughts and prayers. But thoughts and prayers don't stop bullets. 20 years have passed since Columbine, but school shootings have become only more and more common. We need to take action. We must take action. We need to and must confront, tackle, and end this gun violence epidemic once and for all. Ms. Hogg, I want to get from you how your daily life has changed since that shooting.
So when I was preparing for my testimony today and we were discussing this, I realized that pretty much everything in my life has changed. I think one of the greatest changes was the loss, not necessarily the physical loss of people like my brother and other victims and my friends that went through the school shooting, alongside me, but the loss of our past selves, the loss of ourselves who were innocent and believed, like Mr. Schachter said so eloquently today, that we believe that this would never happen to us. I mean, I could go through the specifics, but it would take me probably days. But every single aspect of my life has changed. It seems as though, like I stated before, I was 14 when I experienced the school shooting. And that's the age when kids are kind of ready to have that John Hughes high school experience, if you know what I'm saying. And for me, I went directly from, it seems as though I had to go from childhood to adulthood and skip that period of my life that most people do have the chance to experience, where they get to be a teenager, they get to be a child. And I think about this every single day. My goal for this year was to learn how to be a teenager. And that's something that no child who is 16 should have to experience. And I mean, like I said, the fact that I'm even here today, the fact that I spend my weekends on the Hill when I can, talking with my policymakers, everything has changed. And I really just hope that no other child has to have this experience of losing those precious teenage years where they get the chance to be stupid in a sense, to have fun. But I think that's one of the greatest ways my life has been affected.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Ms. Maples, when you testified in front of this subcommittee last year, the horrific shootings in Parkland, Florida, Santa Fe, Texas, were still recent, and many states were just in the beginning phases of instituting policies to improve school safety, and in some cases, gun control measures. Now, over a year out, can you tell the committee of any challenges that you've had while instituting new school security measures, and are there any lessons learned that you think are important for other states to know?
Well, I'll start out by addressing the challenges piece. Some of the challenges have been making sure that the school districts are all getting the relevant information in a coordinated way. We continue to work on that, and that is something we are able to do at the state level in New Jersey. The implementation of the See Something, Say Something, Mr. Richmond just brought up that piece, and in New Jersey we are doing that. We've rolled that in through an Attorney General's directive that all suspicious activity, that school-related threats are rolled into our See Something, Say Something campaign. New Jersey is a little bit different than a lot of other states. My office coordinates everything from the federal, state, to local level. So the Bureau, the FBI, gets their leads from my folks at one hub location, our Fusion Center. And that's a little bit different model than many other states. I will tell you that getting school districts to recognize those threats and to see something, say what are threats, and reporting those to law enforcement, who then report it to us or directly to us, that is a challenge, but it's something that we're really focused on, getting that public messaging out there. My staff is constantly engaging with the schools, and one of the great benefits we have in New Jersey is the Department of Education. The commissioner has essentially loaned us his school safety team. They actually report to me, but they're education employees. They come in Homeland Security spaces. So we're trying to really coalesce around that one common goal of protecting our schools together in that way. So the challenges of joining any type of units, you wouldn't think of Homeland Security and education kind of linking up the way that we do, but we do, and we're really focused on that.
We appreciate that, Mr. Maples. Let me just close by saying that, having been a victim myself, watching my colleague getting gunned down in the New York City Council, that trauma never leaves you. So, Ms. Hogg, I thank you for your courage. The trauma goes beyond what anyone can imagine when you're in a space, you're a survivor. There are so many other dynamics. So I can relate to all that you've shared with us today, because I'm still recovering to this very day. Now yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to thank the gentlelady. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the ranking member as well. And I apologize for the condition that we find ourselves in. And I say I apologize because we have failed you. The adults have failed you. We shouldn't have allowed unlimited assault weapons on the streets, capable of killing scores in seconds. We failed you. And we ought to do something about it. We don't have the will. We've lost our way. We failed you. We are at a point, regrettably, in our history where we have to prepare for the unthinkable to deal with the inconceivable. That's where we are. Gone are the days when children had to have as a part of their exercise a fire drill. It's an active shooter drill now. Gone are the days when there was a rumor of a person having a knife on campus at my school. And the principal just stopped everything, brought us all into the auditorium and had a meeting. Who has the knife? Now we have assault weapons on campuses. So we have to deal with the inconceivable. And I have to ask you about something that I regrettably must ask about, but I think we have to prepare for this unthinkable, inconceivable event. And that would be, of course, whether or not we're ready to deal with a chemical or biological event. We can't wait. We have to prepare for the unthinkable if we are going to deal with the inconceivable. So I ask as gently as I can, are we adequately prepared for an attack of this kind on a school campus where it should never happen, where it would be inconceivable? Are we having any drills, any information, intelligence accorded our students so that they can deal with these things? Do we have proper equipment available? Or where are we? And if we're not there, then perhaps the adults won't fail us as we go forward. I'm one of the adults. Would someone care to answer, please?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're extremely unprepared. Broward County doesn't even have an active shooter policy, let alone a policy to protect us from a chemical or biological attack. We're just trying to get teachers to teach with a locked door. You know, we're just trying to move the needle. We are so far away from where we need to be. You know, but we can prevent, 80, 90% of these attacks. You know, we've got the gold standard in an anonymous reporting app was developed in Colorado. It's called Safe to Tell. They've stopped thousands of young people from committing suicide. Suicide is the homicide issue. If we can stop suicide, we can stop homicide, and they've stopped hundreds of school shootings. Post-Parkland, we've had dozens of states implement those anonymous threat reporting apps. Every day we hear in the news about mass shootings that are stopped by courageous people that are sending in tips, and kids do it. So we can stop a lot of these as we were talking about on the prevention side, but we have to prepare. We can't stop 100% of these. We have to be cognizant of that. And so that's why, what are we going to do? We need to decide, what are we going to do if a guy with a gun walks on that school campus? How are we going to save lives? And that's what we need. That needs to be addressed, unfortunately, all over this country.
Thank you. I could not agree with you more. And I regret that we find ourselves being reactive when we had a great opportunity to be proactive and deal with these issues such that we wouldn't have to deal with the unthinkable. But there's a future, and we still have the opportunity to change this circumstance if we but only will acquire the courage and the will. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman. I'd like to now recognize the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I want to ask whether the gentleman from Florida wants to go, and I will go after him. You're right. Okay. Just wanted to offer to you. Mr. Chairman, thank you, and to the ranking member for this very vital hearing. And I thank the witnesses. We are sometimes in overlapping hearings, and we have to make our way to an important hearing. Let me acknowledge in particular a dad who lost his son. Your face is familiar. I know that you wish that it was not. And I thank you for putting your energy in a place where those of us who are parents would never want to imagine. I think this committee is well suited, and this House, and this present leadership, with the members of this committee, with Congressman Deutsch, are prepared to listen and to adhere to some of the things that we can do. We don't want to call the roll, but I think you know. Why didn't it stop at Sandy Hook? Why wasn't something done? We tried very hard. So I want to first start with Lauren. We work a lot in Houston with March for Our Lives. I like the word march because we follow, but I know that it is important that we act. Let me ask you this question, because I have talked to teenagers who, like you, have to learn to be a teenager. What is it like with your peers to have to live with the idea of death? Death of your fellow students, death at a school site? What should we know about that as you are growing up?
So for myself, because I was 14 years old when this happened, as I stated previously, I think that's a pivotal time in your life. I mean, all of the 4 high school years are a pivotal time in your life. It's when a lot of your brain development occurs. It's when you're supposed to learn a lot of things at school. And when you have something like a school shooting, when you have something like your friends and teachers being murdered in your classroom next to you, I think there's something drastic that happens within yourself. And I think it's important to address that within regards to trauma, to gun violence, it's hard to heal when this issue continues every single day. It's kind of like rubbing salt into the wound that is our trauma. I mean, the previous question earlier that I was asked when it was, how has your life changed every single day? And I think just every single aspect, like when I go into a restaurant, I have to sit with my back not against the door because I'll feel like somebody will come in. When I go to a movie theater, I have to always make sure I know where the exits are and know if I can be close enough to be able to run out in time. Even in crowded spaces, places I used to go and love to go to, whether that be Disneyland or a concert, I can't go there without being scared that something's gonna happen. So even the things that would be traditionally viewed as fun and an escape turn into themselves an act of trauma, where you don't know what to do and you don't know how to act.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Let me ask Alex's father. I'm going to give you a combined answer. You obviously can't hear that from Alex. But for us to do something along with what we've heard from our experts, you're an expert in terms of making a school solid. But in doing this comprehensively, we have to deal with guns. And this is my question. Mental health and added resources for those students who we miss. I've been working on for many years anti-bullying, which is accelerated cyberbullying and otherwise, and then a positive way of reinforcing schools. So would you respond to that in the context of your organization and your group? Mental health, anti-bullying, guns, and the idea of how we strengthen a school to protect its most precious inhabitants.
You know, I'm on the commission that's investigating the Marjory Stoneman Douglas tragedy, and we had a presentation by Flagler High School, which developed a culture and climate survey that they distribute to all of their students, and it's made their schools safe. I think that's a deficiency in our schools, that we're not doing culture climate surveys of our students and of our teachers, because to reduce violence on campus, reduce bullying. If we don't know what's happening on campus, we can't fix it. I alluded in my presentation and in questions that we don't know, schools underreport violence on campus. We need to get an accurate reporting. In Florida, we require schools to report in violence, and we came to the conclusion that what they're reporting is absolutely garbage, and it's totally incorrect. We have now put measures in place to the Commissioner of Education to financially penalize superintendents that consistently underreport school violence. So we need to get that under control, but we need to find out what's happening first so that we can tackle this bullying problem, and we can provide better mental health to our students and reduce violence on campus, which will reduce violence in our community, because if we're not giving kids, when they're in school, the tools to deal with rejection and failure as they get older, we have horrible consequences.
Let me thank you and the experts as well. My time has expired, but let me just say to the chairman, using the experts, but using the passion of our two witnesses who've experienced it firsthand, can help us be guided in the right direction for working on this very crucial issue. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I'd like to thank the gentlelady, and I recognize the patient gentleman from Florida, Mr. Deutsch.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to you and the ranking member for calling the hearing. I'm grateful to you and your staff for including two of my constituents as witnesses and extending the invitation to me to join you as your guest. I also want to express my gratitude to the thoughtful and dedicated participation of so many members of this committee today. Thanks to the witnesses, all of you, for your testimony and your hard work to make students safer. First, I'd like to seek unanimous consent to enter a statement for the record from Tony Montalto, the surviving father of Gina Montalto and president of Stand with Parkland, a group formed by parents from Stoneman Douglas, if I may.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These families have varying political views, but they write, when it comes to protecting our children and staff at school, we all agree on three key outcomes: secure the school campus, implement better mental health programs, and practice responsible firearms ownership. I hope their goals can be shared by all of us here today, regardless of our political affiliation. Mr. Schachter, Ms. Hogg, I feel so fortunate to know you, so proud to represent you, and so utterly heartbroken by the circumstances that have brought us together. You're survivors of this horrible crisis of gun violence in America. Mr. Schachter, you lost your beloved Alex. Ms. Hogg, you lost friends, classmates, and teachers. In addition to Alex, Alyssa, Scott, Martin, Nicholas, Aaron, Jamie, Chris, Luke, Kara, Gina, Joaquin, Elena, Meadow, Helena, Carmen, and Peter were all lost at Marjory Stoneman Douglas on February 14th, 2018. But you've turned your pain into action. Mr. Schachter, you've been a fierce advocate for expanding the level of expertise in schools, school districts, and states to improve policies. You've become an expert in security infrastructure. I knew from the first moment I spoke with you that within a short period of time you would be a national leader on keeping our schools safe. So I want to ask you, the EAGLES Act, H.R. 3714, will expand the National Threat Assessment Center. By doing that, what can that do to help ensure that schools have the expertise to keep their students and staff safe?
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for everything you've done to protect our children. You've been a great champion of that. As far as the EAGLES Act goes, I talked about this in my opening statement. I am a strong supporter. I hope that we can get the full committee's support and pass this. It is great legislation. We know that threat assessment teams that the Secret Service has developed protect the president and protect Congress, and this is a major problem in schools. We know that threat assessments work, but it needs to be done correctly. There was a threat assessment done on the murderer in 2016 that was completely botched. The problem was the assistant principal that did the threat assessment had no idea how to perform one. He had never conducted a threat assessment in his 30-year history. He didn't know where the paperwork was, and it was completely done wrong. I feel that if it was done correctly, my little boy might be still alive today. So by passing the Eagles Act, we can give education to all schools on proper threat assessments to prevent these acts of targeted violence before they happen. And we've got to stop being reactionary and be proactive, and that's what threat assessments do.
Thank you very much. Ms. Hogg, thanks for your leadership in your school and across the country through March for Our Lives. And thanks for your really powerful testimony today. The March for Our Lives Peace Plan for a Safer America includes a call, among other things, for community-based solutions. As part of that call, you support Representative Moore's bill, H.R. 2457, the National De-Escalation of Violence and Community Safety Training Act. One thing you've not had an opportunity to talk about is why community-based interventions is such an important part of your peace plan.
Community-based intervention programs, as we've talked about today earlier when we're talking about proactive measures, are the perfect example of this. They go in before these things happen, as I stated previously. It's so important for us when we created this plan to include that, because we've seen across the country, and especially communities of color and lower socioeconomic communities, how effective these are in preventing community gun violence. I have so many examples of individuals and stats about stuff that are in regards to violence intervention programs, but one of the greatest examples is Life Camp. It's out of the Bronx, founded by this woman named Erica Ford, and they have violence interrupters that go in and they train youth from the community how to be violence interrupters instead of insiders of this violence and how to keep out of this violence. And I think if we could apply that to our school system across the country, I cannot even imagine the great effects we would see in preventing things like what happened at our school.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to just thank you again. It's so clear from the testimony today, from the expertise on this panel, from the dedication of all four of our panelists, that there is more that we can do in a bipartisan way to help strengthen and bolster the efforts of our witnesses and people just like them all around the country to help keep our schools safe and to help keep kids safe and to prevent the kind of trauma that we've heard so eloquently spoken about. We can do this, and I'm so grateful for your leadership on this issue. I look forward to working with you. And again, you're extending an invitation for me to join you today is something that I will forever be grateful for.
Well, I'd like to thank the gentleman for accepting the invitation, and they're very fortunate to have you as their representative in Congress. I know the work that you do tirelessly for your constituents, and you have been proactive on these issues, and so I just thought it would fair you have the opportunity today to be here. So thank you. We're going to go for a quick second round. I just wanted to ask Mr. Maples, as I mentioned in my opening statement, DHS, along with other agencies, is working on a clearinghouse that will compile best practices for various school safety practices. Can you describe what you want to see out of a clearinghouse to make it useful for New Jersey?
Sure, absolutely. So one of my roles, in addition to being the Director of Homeland Security, I'm also the federally designated Homeland Security Advisor, which is a DHS designation. So we work hand in hand with federal DHS on the wide variety of issues that we confront in the state of New Jersey. I lead in to say that from a clearinghouse perspective, we absolutely welcome that. I think in a place for a structured, directed, and concise plan of the best practices themselves can really help us bolster what we're trying to do at the state level. We do a lot proactively in New Jersey, but having that federal interface and to be able to point that back to someone from the federal government can be very powerful in talking to a superintendent across our 21 counties. So to the degree that the clearinghouse is coming online, we welcome it, and I think that it will continue to help make our schools safe.
Thank you. Let me just, don't want to keep people much longer, but just want to thank all the witnesses for their testimony today. This has been an honor for me to chair this hearing and hear from all of you, all with different experiences on this one very important subject. And Mr. Schachter, you brought up interoperability, which has been my main focus since 2012, arriving here on this committee and the author of the interoperability bill for DHS, and just issues around school safety has been my main thrust. So thank all of you for being here today for your expert testimony. And with that, I will. Where? There's something I have to do here. Okay. All right. Now that we've finished with our questions, I would like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the official record written testimony from the National Association of School Resource Officers, Every Town for Gun Safety, Sandy Hook Promise, the National Association of School Psychologists, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and materials from the American Institute of Architects. Without objection, is so ordered. I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony today and the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. Pursuant to the committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will be open for 10 days. Without objection, hearing no further business, the subcommittee stands adjourned.